In this full-length painting tutorial, I'm going to show you how to paint this pretty still life with watercolour. So let's get into it. I've already done my drawing and I'll tell you about that in a little while, and I'll also put all the materials that I'm going to be using as well as this little palette here in the description box underneath this video, and I'll explain to you what I'm using as I work through. The paints are from MaimeriBlu, but use whichever that you have within your own kit if you want to join in. The colours that I have mixed here are from the top, working round clockwise. We have neutral tint, burnt umber and sepia. I'm working wet on wet to paint the background of this painting, and this means that you just apply the water where you want to drop the paint, so you have to be a little bit careful where you put your plain water wash to begin with. Once the water has been applied, you can see I'm using my number 8 round brush here just to drop in the colour, and it will gradually splurge into that wet paper. Because I'm using a cold pressed or not surface paper for this tutorial, it means that it just gently finds its own way, and it has this kind of texture to it, so it just makes it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm just dropping in these colours as I see fit. We have a mixture of sepia going on here with a little bit of burnt umber mixed in. It doesn't matter what colours you use for this, you can use whichever that you want to. This is my number 4 size brush from Rosemary Co. These are new brushes to me. I've just bought them to try them out, and I have to say, when I was working through this tutorial, I absolutely loved them. These are synthetic pointed round brushes. They have a particularly sort of stiff point, so they're a little bit different to what I'm used to, but I love them because they're synthetic and they're super easy to use, and I will link, like I said, everything in the description box underneath this video. So when I've applied that first wash, you can see as it's settling in, I'm using the points of my number 4 brush here just to push the paint up to the pencil line. I'm dropping in more colour just to give it a little bit more depth of form, just to give it a little bit more interest. This is the neutral tint going in here, and I'll just drop in the other colours just where I feel to, kind of really randomly dropping them in and just having fun with it. Painting's all about enjoying the process and of course learning as we go. Right here on this channel we provide you with a brand new tutorial every single week, every Tuesday, so if this is something that interests you, you may want to consider subscribing and hitting that little bell on the side. That way you'll be notified every time we upload a new video and you won't miss any content. This is my number 2 small eradicator brush. It's a synthetic brush. As you can see, I'm using it to sort of soften any hard edges, but this is a really stubborn paint and it won't move. But it doesn't matter in this instance because we're going to be painting over that anyway. But just be careful when you apply your initial wash that you don't want that water to really go over any areas that you don't want that colour. Now that everything's dry, I'm mixing transparent yellow and transparent orange, as you can see here, using my number 4 brush to apply. All of the colours that I'm using today are from my MaimeriBlu set, apart from the transparent orange, which is Schminker. But as I always say, it's really important that you use whichever colours that you have within your own kit. And if you don't have these colours and you're struggling to match them, do drop it in the comments below, and I'll try and help you based on the colours that you have so that you can join in with this tutorial. This is wet on dry, so this time I'm applying the paint directly onto the paper with my brush. So we have the transparent yellow going on first, and this is going over the fruit. As you can see on the top of my pad here, I've written the word malice, which is I think the Latin name or the proper name for these fruits. They're actually crab apples, I believe. I took this photograph while I was at my favourite place in the world, which is Daylesford Organic Shop. I'm sure if you live in the UK and you live near the Cotswolds, still in the world, that's where it is, and I do a lot of my photography there, and I'm completely obsessed by the place. They always have wonderful displays of flowers and what have you. So this is where I've got the photograph from that we're working from today, and these are, like I said, I think they're called, the proper name is crabapple. So because we are working in layers with watercolour, as you probably know, it goes through that ugly duckling stage, and I would ask you to stay, if you can, right until the end of this video so that you can see that tricky process unfold, so that you can also see how I create these paintings and get past that sort of funny stage that we all know so well. So with that first layer in place, that's kind of like my underwash, and that's the colour that I can see underneath that initial colour. I'm dropping in, this is a mixture of, that I have on my palette here. We have the pink tone, which is Rose, Alizarin Madder, and Imperial Red. You could also use a carmine or something like that if you don't have these. Notice how I'm cleaning my brush and my little puddle on my middle of my palette here, patting it dry and then blending it with the brush. This technique is really, really easy to do, and particularly so on this paper, which makes blending very, very easy. But you must pat your brush dry before you apply it onto the paper, otherwise you'll find that your paint will bloom. I hope that makes sense. I say it, I hope that makes sense. Sometimes when I'm doing voiceovers, it can be really difficult to remember everything. So if you're struggling with me talking too fast or anything like that, just let me know in the comments and I will do my best to help you. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that we provide you with a free reference photograph to work from. That's the reference photograph that you can see on your screen right now, along with a very simple line drawing. You can trace it down, and I'll put a video in the description box underneath this video that explains how I trace down my drawings, the kind of old school way. And there are a couple of ways that you can obtain the reference photograph and the line drawing, so let me just tell you how. We have a couple of ways that you can access our free reference photographs and line drawings. We have our very own private Facebook group, and as a member you can access all of them here. There is another way, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. And in case you're not a Facebook fan, and I know it's not for everybody, I just want to reassure you that our group is really friendly, really helpful and informative, and you can also post up your finished paintings and have feedback from me and our other group members. You can see here some of the completed works in the student gallery. Having positive feedback from your paintings is a great way to learn and a really amazing confidence booster. If this is something that interests you, I'll put a link to the Facebook group in the description underneath this video. But if Facebook really isn't for you, then don't worry, because I'll put a screenshot of the line drawing and the reference photograph right at the end of this video, so be sure to stay right until the end and you can print it off that way. Okay, so now that everything's dry, you can see once again I'm dropping in these colours, I'm applying these colours, and I'm just mixing them up as I work through between the Rose, Alizarin Madder, and of course the Imperial Red, and a little bit of transparent orange. I'm just mixing them up. I'm not being too careful at the moment, but you can see that by glazing the colours, which is applying a colour on top of another colour, this way you can still see the underlying colour underneath, which means that you can still see that beautiful yellow tone shine through. This means that because watercolour is transparent, it gives it that lovely luminosity, and you can still see those beautiful colours underneath. So I'm just flitting between the colours that I have mixed on my palette and just working through bit by bit using my this is my number 2 brush from Rosemary Co. And as I said at the beginning, everything that I'm using today, including the paint, the paper, the brushes and the palette, all of that stuff, I'll list in the description box underneath this video in case you've missed what I'm saying as I talk you through this tutorial. So I've now done exactly the same thing on the other fruit here. So this is Rose, Alizarin Madder and Sepia that I've mixed here on my palette with a tiny, you can see the consistency that I have here. So we've mixed the Rose with the Sepia, and I'm applying this to the top of the little bowl that these are in. This is like a kind of terracotta bowl that they're sitting on the table. So I'm just applying this to the light top of the basin, of the bowl on the top, the little jar, the little container that they're in on the top here. Just taking that on the lip like this, and then go into the sepia, which I'm applying with my number 4 brush, and just applying this to the base section of the little jar, of the little container. You can see I have a thicker mix of sepia on the top there, so that we can vary the ratio of water to paint and have a thicker value, which is a darker tone, when we feel it is necessary. So just taking that colour, making sure that I'm not letting it bleed into that already wet paint. So if you don't want your colours to bleed like this, make sure that each layer is dry. Continuing the process until all the white areas have gone. I've just noticed actually that I've forgotten one of the little crab apples to the side there, and I'll sort that out in a minute. Okay, so I'm just taking some of the darker value now and applying this to some of the little stalky bits that you can see. This is my number 2 size brush. So as you can see, it's beginning to look a little bit more three-dimensional now, but of course it's still looking a little bit untidy, so we are going to be working through this layer by layer and step by step. So even if you're new to painting, you can join in with our tutorials. So this is sepia, and I'm working now on the inside of the little container that you can see here, and just taking a bit of care to clean my brush, just blending that through again. So with a damp brush, you can just manipulate that paint and take it where you want it to go. But make sure, as I always say, clean your brush, pat it dry, and then blend it out. If you don't pat it dry, your paint will just splurge and you won't have the control. I'm just doing the same thing on the other side. Cleaning my brush and once again blending that through. This is my number 2 size round. Now this might look a little bit scary, but trust me, this is really not that scary to do. So all I'm doing here is taking this colour over some of the fruit. If I were to leave this dark tone on its own, it would be too harsh an outline. So I'm taking this colour, which is just sepia on its own, in a slightly thicker consistency, and blending it over the fruit to make the fruit look like they're actually sitting in the bowl. Super easy to do, but a little bit daunting if you haven't done it before. So just do a little bit at a time. So applying the paint like this, where this little connecting area is here, that's darker value, and then just gently taking it over the fruit. Just sharpening up that outside edge here, and you can see with that damp brush and the same process, just taking it over the fruit. We'll still need to build up these as we work through, but this gives this kind of initial wash so that we can start to build it up later. Everything's now dry, so I'm going over with my second glaze here, my second layer of paint. This is just sepia on its own and carrying through the process like this. Here I'm applying a mix of Viridian with a tiny bit of sepia to this little leaf here. So this is just to give it its sort of basic wash. So we have Viridian with a tiny bit of sepia, and I've mixed my own greens here. You could use something like a sap green, but I've just used a mix of ultramarine deep with the yellow that we used at the start, so that's transparent yellow. And I've just done a sort of basic green colour here, which I'm taking all over the leaves, as you can see. This is neutral tint, and it's in a kind of watery consistency, and I've already drawn my outline for these little shadow areas. I've added a tiny bit of green to the section here with a tiny bit more sepia, so that it's just given it a bit of variation, and I'll complete the other side in exactly the same way. So this is just a tiny bit of neutral tint with a tiny bit of the green mix that I've already have on my palette. Now, if you are new here, just to let you know that all our tutorials here on YouTube are full length, so that you can join in no matter what your level. But if you really are enjoying watercolour and botanical painting is your thing, just to let you know that we do have a Patreon where we have exclusive content that you will never find here on YouTube. So in case that interests you, let's take a look. If you love botanical painting and want to know more, then head over to our Patreon. We have different membership tiers so that you can take your botanical painting to the next level. Every month we launch a brand new painting tutorial covering all things botanical to help you grow. The tutorials are exclusive to Patreon and are ad-free, so if you want to paint like this, then take a look. Link in description. Okay, so everything's now dry and I'm focusing my attention back on the leaves. So I've mixed here the same green mix as before. So we have French ultramarine deep with the transparent yellow, and the sort of dark green tone that you can see on the bottom there is with a tiny bit of neutral tint, and the same colour at the top, just a darker value, so that's less water. If you have got a colour like Cerulean green or something like that you could use that instead. But because I'm using a fairly limited palette today, I wanted to mix my own greens up, and by adding a tiny bit of neutral tint to the already green mix that I have, it just means that it darkens it up and it gives it that lovely darker value. So if you are enjoying this video, you may want to consider giving me a thumbs up. It's a free way of letting YouTube know that you're enjoying my content, and it means that this video will reach more people and hopefully they can enjoy it too. So I'd really appreciate a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. So here you can see me negatively painting around some of the veins, just leaving a little gap here and there, and that is what I've done on the other leaf as well. So just using the tip of my brush, making sure that everything's dry, and I'll do the same on this one here, just running the paint brush along the middle, filling that side in, and then just leaving a tiny little gap between these two colours just to create that negative space which will form the vein of the leaf. Now, of course, this isn't a botanical painting, it's just a still life, so we won't have the detail that we have with that botanical work, but it's just a lovely thing to do now that we're heading into autumn. I saw these and I knew I had to paint them. So now that this is dry, you can see me adding the darker green here and there, where I just feel it is needed, just to give a little bit of tonal contrast and darker values. Of course, when you're painting, it's important to know that the colours are important, but not just that, the value or the strength of that colour. So sometimes the colour will be darker and sometimes it will need to be lighter, and by varying the tone of that colour, it just makes your paintings come to life. And you can see me here just dropping in a darker green tone to the already damp paint just to give it that really lovely darker value, and just blending it through as I would normally do. Okay, so everything's now dry and I've mixed a selection of colours here. We have transparent orange with the transparent yellow mixed up there. We have the rose alizarin madder and all the other colours that we've used, and I'll talk you through them as I work through bit by bit. I've had to sort of go on to my second little palette here. This set comes in a set of 2 anyway, and the darker colours that you can see there are the same as before, but darker values, which means I have less water. So it's just simply sepia with rose madder, and we have the neutral tint, and of course the same mix as before, but with more rose madder. So going back to this little one here, this is the rose alizarin, I don't know, rose madder here, and we're just dropping in the sepia to give it a little bit of a darker value, and I'm adding a tiny bit of the neutral tint to create the shadow, taking care not to let that bleed into the wet paint. Ideally, this should be dry before you do this. Just patting it around like that to create that little shadow, and picking up that darker value and just going over and enhancing that darker shade that we already applied earlier on. Just taking the brush and working around the outside of this little container here, and now we can start to really enhance the colours that we've already put in place. So the scary part is gone, we know exactly where we're going, and we can now put in these little folds again and start to blend that colour over the existing paint. You can see how it's faded as it dries, so we need to build that up again, applying the same colour as before and taking it over some of the fruit, as you can see me doing here. I promise you it's not as scary as it looks, so give it a try and see how you get on using this kind of method that I'm using here. You can see the colours that I'm dipping in and out of, so that's the rose alizarin madder with the imperial red, transparent orange, transparent yellow, and transparent orange and transparent yellow mixed together. But like I said, if you're struggling with the mixes, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to help you. Once again, just blending it through with a damp brush. So the paper that I'm using is, this is from, the little pad that I'm using here is from Etcher, and it's 300 GSM 100% cotton paper. It really takes this kind of painting really, really well. I adore this little pad and I've used it for quite a few of my tutorials here on YouTube. I absolutely love it. So once again, applying this colour and blending it through, you can see the colours that I'm picking up here from my palette and just spreading them around with that brush. Where I've applied that little triangle there, I'm just blending that out onto the fruit as you can see me doing here in the way that I did earlier on. Picking up that orange tone and just applying that with a little bit of red and a little bit of orange. We're just dropping in these colours just to give the fruit some form and a little bit of dimension. Dropping in that red colour, as you can see. Like I said earlier on, if you don't have the rose madder that I've spoken of here, you could use something like a carmine or anything like that, sort of nice red colour that you could apply here rather than the colours that I'm using if you don't have them. I particularly like the MaimeriBlu paints because they are single pigment and you really get a good strong colour payoff for your money. I really like quite a lot of different brands of paint, but I really like these. Dropping in that darker value as you can see and letting it do its thing and blending into the paint. So I'm going over the container again, adding some sepia and just letting it, just sort of randomly applying it where I think I want that darker tone to be. I haven't gone strictly to the photograph, I just wanted to sort of do my own thing a little bit here. Enhancing the colour and just adding a tiny bit of neutral tint underneath to make that little container look like it's sitting on the table and we can see that little bit of reflection. I've just added a tiny bit of a transparent yellow to the neutral tint and just following the lines that I did earlier on and blending it through as usual and just using that damp brush to do that. You can see this is my number 4 size brush that I'm using. Carrying on the process, I've gone down to my number 2 size brush now, just adding a bit of detail here and there. And this is a watered down version of the rose madder with the sepia colour, and I just wanted to add a tiny bit of detail to give that some depth, and with the darker value underneath the rim of the container like this. Just sharpening up that edge. And adding some darker values here and there, dropping in that paint while it's still damp. So this is kind of like a wet on wet. You're charging the paint with the darker value to give it that lovely soft blur. Once again, I'm blending it through on the other side. This is a mixture of sepia with a tiny bit of the rose alizarin madder. So all I'm doing now is just adding my final touches, going through the fruit bit by bit, and I'm also going to be adding a tiny bit of detail to just going over some of these areas once again. Because we've applied the paint in fine layers, it means that we can really take our time building them up, and we can apply several different layers over this. It's not going to go muddy because of our lovely light washes that we applied in the beginning. Working through bit by bit and just enhancing the bits that I feel are needed. I'm using the dry paint on my palette here, so this is just the sepia on its own and just outlining the stalks on some of the fruit as you can see me doing here. And I'm only taking this colour up one side so that it gives it that realistic look, and glazing over that leaf to get rid of some of that harsh negative painting that we did there. That's just plain water that I've used to do that. This painting's nearly complete now. Make sure that you stay right until the end, where I'll put the line drawing and reference photographs so that you can pause the video and screenshot them and print them out that way. If you have enjoyed this video and you love watercolour as much as I do, you can watch the playlist that I'll stick on the end of this video now, and it will help you improve your skills. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.